The following is a presentation of the Mat Talk Podcast Network.
The BVU Beavercast is proudly supported by alum and two-time All-American Monty Mers and High Country Search. Elevate your search at highcountrysearch.com.
Welcome to the Lodge. It's time to settle in for the Buena Vista Wrestling Beavercast. Join host Jason Bryant and head wrestling coach Jeff Brees as we talk all things BV wrestling. Now, on to the show.
And stepping into the Lodge today is 1986 NCAA Division III runner-up Dan Dresser. His name has been in the news recently. We're going to talk a little bit about what he's going to be doing with Iowa State and the Cyclone Regional Training Center as his older brother, by a year and 10 days, I'm told, Kevin Dresser, the new head coach at Iowa State. But before we even get to the stuff that's going on with the Division I school in Ames, we've got our own story to tell with Dan Dresser here on the Beavercast. Dan, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Jason. Glad to be here.
Now, this got to be an exciting time to be a wrestling person in the state of Iowa. We've got you got programs firing up. Of course, Iowa's fires on all cylinders with Tom and Terry Brands. You've got the job that Doug Schwab's doing at Northern Iowa, and then you've got the reinvigorated staff there at Iowa State. From a Division I standpoint, this is an exciting time to be an Iowa wrestling fan.
Oh, absolutely. I think it couldn't get much better, honestly. I know the coaches from Iowa, Tom and Terry. I had the opportunity to spend a few years around those guys when I was over wrestling in the Iowa room, trying to grow up, if you will. And I know Coach Schwab a little bit, but not as much as I know Tom and Terry. Great guys, have a great deal of respect for them. Had a few fun years around them, and of course the new staff at Iowa State. Obviously, I'm very excited about that as well.
Now let's just go back in time. You guys are from Humboldt, Iowa. As anybody knows, Mike Chapman, you can't mention Humboldt without mentioning the name Frank Gotch. What was it like growing up wrestling in a town known for Frank Gotch and in a town that's known for its love of wrestling?
You know, Humboldt has a pretty rich tradition in wrestling, and you're right, it does go back to the whole Frank Gotch era. So it was for us growing up. We had some guys that were older that very successful. There's a Dreyer family, a Reimers family. There's quite a few, a Caldwell family that when we were growing up that we had that had a strong influence on us. And so it was just something that was part of the DNA, I think, around there. And then of course you had a lot of good schools in the conference that were very well known. Your Algonas, your Clarions, your Eagle Groves. Just a lot of rich history with some big names that went on and did some pretty significant things in the sport.
Now, when it came to wrestling, who wrestled first, you or Kevin?
You know, I think if I remember back, we probably both did at the same time. I think, honestly, that they had a little city tournament. Coach Joe Fitch, who was kind of the mainstay for how Humboldt began and started the program, had a little city tournament to try and I think generate interest. And basically I was in kindergarten and Kevin was in first, and I think you had to be in first grade to actually wrestle in it. But I think we both won probably little gold plastic cups that were 3 or 4 inches high. And once we had that, I was ready to go to the Olympics. So it was our first entree into the sport of wrestling.
How much did your dad Skip play into that role?
You know, it was interesting because my father was in a school that they didn't have wrestling, so he was involved in basketball and track. And so I guess my early memories with my father were him exposing, just once we got interested, he got very heavily involved. I remember when we were really little, we were in the basement and we had a wrestling book. And I remember specifically we were trying to figure out from just some illustrations in a book how to do a fireman's carry. And ironically enough, it must have worked pretty well specifically for Kevin, because that was one of his main arsenal tools when he was going through high school. He hit a lot of fireman's carries. So I guess we'll give some kudos to that illustration.
And it's one of those things that when I came across your brother Kevin coaching when he was at Grundy, and I was a high school student at Pocosin, which was a rival at the time. And then when he moved on to Christiansburg, there's the voice of Skip Dresser doing the audio, and it's like from a guy you said, as you tell the story, didn't know much about wrestling from the start. He definitely ended up calling a pretty good match when all was said and done.
Oh, there's no doubt. He definitely got fans on their feet when they were sitting at home and he was on the radio. I remember a lot of people coming up and talking to me about how excited they got listening to a broadcast because my father was not shy about interjecting the emotion into the broadcast. So yeah, he did a great job and ended up actually announcing for a lot of other sports. But wrestling was kind of the beginning of that.
Now, when the time comes to choose colleges, with him being older and then going to Iowa, you go the Division III route at Buena Vista. Why was there any talk about you guys going to the same place, or was the talent separation that much a point where it says, you know what, Iowa's not for me?
I think it was some of that. Actually, Jason, I think for me, comparatively to Kevin, I was what you would call the proverbial very, very late bloomer. So if you think about it, I wrestled 138 pounds my senior year in high school, and my 158 my last 2 years in college. But even when I was a senior in college, I was probably 175 pounds dripping wet, and I'm probably 210 to 215 now. So, and I like to think with not too much excess. I'm sure a little more than probably I should, but I was very, very late as far as physically maturing. So I didn't really have both the mental and the physical maturity or the mindset to go enter into a Division I, nor the accolades. I'm being very candid. And in looking at Buena Vista, had a great tradition, and it was very, very early in the program. It was only probably 4 or 5 years prior to that, the coach Baxter came in. Had a lot of respect for what he'd done, and after meeting him and some of the guys that really came from the very, very close proximity, Buena Vista was a really good fit because it had a tremendous program, a tremendous coach, and I knew a lot of guys. You can talk Emmitsburg, you can talk who else was around there. We had Belmont, we had Hampton, we had just a lot of people that came from that area that wrestled during that era.
Yeah, and the proximity didn't hurt. It's hour due west of Humboldt?
Yeah, it was very convenient to get back and forth from Humboldt to Storm Lake, Iowa.
So when you look at what you're doing now in terms of you work in sales in the tech field, in the tech world, you, as you said before we started, you're not the technical guy, but you're the guy selling the stuff for the technical guys. And, how much does your work, day-to-day operation, you look back, it's like, you know what, if it's not for a college degree, and specifically maybe the BV college degree, my life would have probably turned out differently?
I think that there's a lot of truth to that. I actually was fortunate enough to be inducted into Buena Vista's Hall of Fame. And one of the things that I remember vividly talking about during that presentation speech, if you will, was I said that what I learned at Buena Vista, which was a great institution and great education, great people, there can't say enough good things about it, was what I learned over at Sieben Center, which is where we had the athletic complex and the wrestling room, was every bit as much of value to me as what I learned in any classroom on campus. So to me, it spoke volumes because, like I said, it was a great educational institution, but I learned a whole lot on that mat, a lot of days scrapping day in and day out. So yeah, it was very instrumental for me.
When you look at your development as a wrestler under Coach Baxter at Buena Vista, you talked about being a late bloomer. Last 2 years of your career, you were 5th as a junior, 2nd as a senior. What was really the difference between you going from, not placing and competing at the national championships to finishing 5th as a junior?
I think maturity continued to play a role in that, and along with that goes confidence. I did have a unique opportunity with Kevin being a year older than me. During my summer months, I traveled really almost coast to coast doing camps out in Pennsylvania and out in Oregon with the University of Iowa. So I had the opportunity to spend a fair amount of time on the mat with a lot of guys from the universities, the mainstays that you think about when you think about that 1982 to 1986 run of national championships. So it was a great opportunity. I learned a lot and stayed close to the sport in the off season. And I think that obviously was a tremendous help for me, but the maturity thing also played a big role.
What was it like when you compare the landscape of college wrestling to now from when you were competing? I'm looking at some of the names from that 85 tournament and your weight class, the champion of your weight class is a guy a lot of people in the sport of wrestling know. Andy Saris. He's an Olympian and he was one of these guys that was really good at Greco-Roman. What do you recall about that weight class that year at 158?
It was there were some good kids. I was a junior the year that Andy won it, I believe. Yes. It was my junior year, and he was one of those guys. He had that a little bit shorter stocker build, but he was really good at upper body. I remember the individual that I wrestled in the semifinals from Luther, last name was Boslog, had probably one of the bigger 58 pounders I'd ever wrestled in my career. 2 years at 158, and he in the finals. He was good upper body as far as a good hand fighter, pummeling, that kind of thing. And Saris caught him out of the gate in a headlock for 5, and that pretty much sealed the deal. So yeah, Saris was a great competitor. Didn't know him personally, but do remember that he was pretty proficient with his upper body. Obviously, making the Greco team is pretty big accolade.
Now, when you go to your senior year, you become the first finalist in school history. What did that mean, and what do you remember about that moment?
It was great to break into that finals, being the first one. Obviously disappointing not to win the championship, but it wasn't probably one of my better matches. And I think a little bit of it is I looked at it and I think I probably felt, and this probably goes along with the maturity aspect, I felt I'd cleared the hurdle and got into the finals and probably didn't necessarily have what I'll say was the right mindset to go out and win that match. And thus it wasn't one of my better matches. I wrestled that same individual from Brockport and lost in a wrestle-back match by a point. It was a pretty good match my junior year. But, good kid, tough kid, not taking anything away from him. But it was just maybe not one of my better performances.
One interesting note about that match is Coach Don Murray in the corner of Brockport, still coaching at Brockport to this day.
Wow. That's amazing. That is amazing. Because I think about Coach Baxter, and Coach Baxter continued on. I can't remember exactly what year Coach got out, but he spent a lot of years and did a lot of amazing things for Buena Vista and a lot of individuals that you're not going to find a more popular guy or a guy that's more well-respected and loved by people that went out and went to battle for him every day.
Everybody we've talked to has got an interesting Baxter story. I want to hear one of your interesting Al Baxter stories, because he was on this program about a year and a half ago, and he was telling some good stories.
Yeah, there are a lot of good Baxter stories. He was the guy that was the most intense when you were in competition in the heat of battle. And then he was the most relaxed, jovial, liked to joke around and kept things light when you weren't in competition. So, I remember situations where maybe when I was at a sophomore tournament and wrestling somebody that was ranked nationally, and we had a close match, and I think it ended up going at that point in time down to a referee's decision at that, that was still prevalent. And him saying, commenting in the corner when we were waiting for the decision just went on and on about how he was going to go rip that wall down at the south end of the gymnasium if they didn't decide that I won that match, because it was so obvious. And, just the animation behind him was interesting. Another time when I was a freshman, we wrestled at a duel against one of our rivals in the conference, and we'd won a tournament at their place handily just before Christmas. We came back, and obviously we had a little Christmas lag, if you will, and lost that. And I remember there were 2 freshmen on varsity. I was both of myself, and it was actually my college roommate, Paul Van Osbury. We both won that night, and some of our probably upperclassmen that had expectations to win fell a little bit short. And boy, I'll tell you what, it was an intense moment in the locker room. I thought we might be safer just to walk home from that duel as opposed to get in the van. But then the next day, the guy's like, guys, I'm sorry. I probably got a little more excited than I should have. But so he was great. But one of the funnier stories is I remember we had a kid that was upper weight, probably a 190 pounder, was wrestling an individual who was a 2-time NCAA champion. And there was, this individual was much less skilled at that point. And when he went out to wrestle him, he was in the corner with Baxter, and he asked Baxter what he should do. He said, "Coach, what do I do?" And he said, get in a good stance and keep your hands really in close together. And so the kid tried to show him if that's what he meant. So he put his hands close together, and Coach Baxter goes, "No," he goes, "closer like this, like you're praying." And so it was kind of funny that say a little prayer before you go out there against this dude.
Now, we look back at that 86 team, which brought home a third-place trophy from, at the time, Trenton State, now known as the College of New Jersey. 6 All-Americans on that team. What was it about that team that was so special?
I think we all fed off of each other, honestly, Jason. I think there was, when you get the ball rolling, nobody wanted to be the person that let that team down. And I think there was a pretty strong work ethic with the group. Not to say that many of the teams do, but I think we just fed off each other. We had a good group of seniors that were in that core mix, and it just seemed to be when somebody had a big match, everyone just followed suit. And I remember traveling out to Air Force Academy, and we went a lot of places. And I think that year, as a matter of fact, we won every duel we were in. The only thing that we didn't actually win, and that was against some Division II and I think one Division I team. The only thing we didn't win, ironically, was the NCAA tournament Division III. And I guess I'll get on my soapbox a little bit here. We had 2 individuals. One was a 150 pounder by the name of Mike Shimp, who was a really tough guy, just a hard nosed guy. And he should have at worst made the finals and had just a miserable case of the flu. Couldn't have hit at a worse time and ended up placing 7th, which was, he'd already been an All-American the year before. He placed 4th or 3rd, and he got 7th. And so we missed some valuable points there. We also had a 190 pounder by the name of Doyle Nag, who was a returning All-American, had a little bit of a knee injury and a setback and didn't even compete for us. So we lost some valuable points there as well. So it was, it was really, if we would have been able to put all the appropriate folks at their weights and compete, I think we would have been second for sure, and maybe even had a shot at chasing the title. But it was a great group of guys.
Now, earlier this year, we talked to Davey Jordan, who was the first national champion in school history. And if my timelines looks like there was a little bit of an overlap there. And he tells a story about him being just a skinny little runt coming into the wrestling room in Storm Lake. What do you remember about Davey Jordan and him coming on campus?
Davey and I are really, really good friends. I've got a lot of respect for Davey. He's a great individual. He had his first years. There were a couple. He and his roommate Rick Caldwell, who was I think a couple-time All-American and had a tremendous run as a coach in high school, were rooming together. So we spent a lot of time with those guys. Obviously, Dave was a lot smaller than me, but Rick was probably closer to my weight. So I used to drill and work with Rick a lot as a freshman. But Dave was one of those guys that I remember watching as a freshman when he came in. He was really that little, being a 118 pounder. He was that little guy that came in, and I saw him even as a freshman. I remember seeing toward the end of the season and thought, this kid's going to make some noise. And obviously he did, being a 2-time All-American and the first national champion, but just great wrestler, great guy.
When you look at the landscape of Division III wrestling now, and you know that the landscape is super competitive. It's not just Wartburg and everybody else. There are teams that are still trying to build and catch. Wartburg within the Iowa Conference, Augsburg within that, and you've seen teams out east really have good years there and out. But within the Iowa Conference, it's super competitive. What are some things that you've seen over the course of the years that have really changed in how Division III wrestling is really kind of looked at nationally, and how it is coached, and how they bring wrestlers into these respective programs?
There's been obviously Warburg has kind of set the standard, and they've done a great job in recruiting and developing athletes that have won a lot of titles for them. And in complete honesty, I haven't probably followed Division III as closely as I should, and just as life goes on, and you have a lot of other things with kids and kids activities, and so I don't probably stay in close proximity to it like I would have. But I think the biggest difference right now is for us when we were competing. The thing that was nice about Division III is that you still had that ability to compete at the Division I level. And so there was always that, carrot there. You could still make it to the big show, if you will. And I'm sure there's a lot of guys that are competing at Division III right now. And I think Division II obviously was as well, that look at it and say, it'd be nice to have that opportunity. But obviously they've changed the rules, and you finish your Division III, Division II, and you're at the end of the season. So we really love that. And there were guys I remember that came through Division III, some guys from Montclair, Monaco's, and that went on and were all Americans in the Division I NCAAs.
Now, as we look at you're talking about the golden years, talking about Al Baxter, and you've got Jeff Brees, who's he's admittedly said he's struggling right now. He hasn't got anybody through the last 2 years, and trying to build a program basically from scratch. Any advice from the outskirts? Be like, you know what, Coach, have you tried this yet?
Yeah, that's a tough call, and I've spent a little bit of time around Coach Brees. I think he's doing a great job, and I think it's really, if you can solve the equation of how do you attract that athlete, and I think in being around him in the short period of time that I have, that there's definitely the skill set to develop that athlete. It's a lot of tradition plays a big role in it, and there obviously have been in a rebuilding phase for a long time. So I guess if you can solve the equation of attracting the athletes there, you've got a huge head start, because I really believe that they have the ability to develop them. And so I think they're making some good progress in what I've seen lately. And I think they're going to make a big difference there, and they're going to start seeing some of these kids that are going to be NCAA qualifiers. They're going to be putting some kids on the podium. So it's not a short race. It's the proverbial marathon, not the sprint.
So shifting gears now to what's going to be going on in Ames with, of course, your brother getting the job at Iowa State. He brought you on as the director of the Cyclone Regional Training Center. Let's talk about what your role is going to be, and what's it going to mean to you to get back into wrestling more actively than you have been the last several years.
It's interesting because as this whole thing unfolded, Kevin and I had a number of conversations, and I've joked at some of our recent regional town hall, and then I had a little bit of a welcome back, if you will, and had some folks out to so we had a couple of social events. But I joke about the fact that when we were talking about it at the beginning, probably 3 weeks or so prior to it actually being announced, I kind of asked him, I said, what do you need here? What do you think it's going to take to be successful? And it was really, I think, putting a few pieces of the puzzle, having the commitment from the administration, which was already, they were showing very much that was going to be the case. And then it's a matter of, can you make sure you have the right coaches in place to help develop that? And then, the regional training center became a big part of it. And a lot of that, revolves around having not only just the fan base, but having the financial support. So as we talked about it, I kind of looked at it as it's really the crossroads of where wrestling and business come together. And so, I always looked at it and said, I've got the connections on both sides, and I've worked in both arenas in the last 25 years quite a bit, because after I got out of Buena Vista, I spent, maybe 6-7 years in the Iowa room wrestling, just because I was having a hard time growing up. And I think it was, how do I parlay a 4-year college life into a 10-year college life? Which I may have done successfully. I know that my parents would have said that would have been the best move, but it was the path I chose, and don't regret it. I learned a lot, and had a great experience wrestling in the Iowa room for a number of years. So it was, and then after that, when I came to Des Moines and decided I needed to get a real life, I had some guys that I competed with in college and went in and worked with the Urbandale High School for about 10 years. Just what I always call the opportunity to work with kids, teach kids how to wrestle, but not having the administrative things. I didn't have to be there for weigh-ins. I didn't have to be there for if they were making grades. A lot of the things that coaches have to manage as part of their program. It was I went in and taught them how to wrestle and walked out, and then coached as well. So I had the opportunity to do that for 10 years at Urbandale, and a coach, Wes Boehm, who was a coach there, gave me a tremendous amount of latitude. He would let me run practice. He would let me, teach. So I really enjoyed that aspect of it and stayed close. And then after that, after Coach Boehm left, his sons graduated, Bryce and Austin, who I spent a lot of time with as well. I was living in Ankeny, and a good friend of mine and was coaching at Ankeny, Dave Ewing. I came into the Ankeny room for probably about 7 years and worked with a lot of the kids, high school, and then we'd have some college kids come back. So it gave me the opportunity with the role that I was in a sales capacity to have some autonomy and stay close to that. So it was a great experience to be able to have wrestling, play out in my life for quite a while. At the same time, I was working in the business world. So kind of a long-winded answer coming back is, in talking with Kevin, was how do we connect the dots from, and truly it is a CEO type role. That's one of the things that Jamie Pollard said was, Kevin was attractive because he looked the part of a CEO, the way he'd run the program. And I think that's where we kind of connected the dots, Kevin and I. And I said, well, if you need this, I said, I can pull the business side in as well as the wrestling side. So I maybe in hindsight stepped out on a limb a little bit, and as I had that conversation with him. So I think I was by default dubbed, okay, now you're going to be the director of the Cyclone Regional Training Center. So I think that's kind of how it evolved.
So who's the better salesman, you or him?
Oh my gosh, I don't know. You might have to ask an outside party. If I have to stick to my true competitive spirit, I'd have to say me, right?
Right. And now that kind of leads me into the business side of the Regional Training Center, because this is something that's really dotted a lot of Division I programs. There's even some Division II and Division III teams that have regional training centers and are defined as such. But when it came to setting this thing up, I mean, what's the paperwork like and getting everything organized and dealing with the university and dealing with USA Wrestling and making sure that eligibility is set with the NCAA? I mean, it seems to me like a daunting procedure to set up.
I'll have to plead a little bit of ignorance on this one, Jason, because Kevin obviously had experience in doing this in Virginia Tech. So I let some of that, or a lot of that administrative. So setting up the nonprofit, the 501c3, and some of the other things that are required to actually conduct a regional training center. That was, right in Kevin's wheelhouse. So he and his ops individual, Robin, really did a lot of that. So my role and my focus has really been more about helping him find the connections from the business and the wrestling world to come together and share the vision of what the belief is to really take the program and have it evolve into what it has been historically. And so that's probably a little bit more of where the value that Kevin sees that I bring and the role that I'll take on. So, setting it up to me from the outside, it didn't seem like it was a daunting task, and maybe I say that because I wasn't involved. But once you've got it set up in the 501c3, I believe is what it is. Again, it wasn't really a lot more beyond that.
With a lot of Cyclone flags flying, you're going to have plenty of room to put that blue and gold of BV up somewhere, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That'll never go away. That's always going to be there. A lot of great memories.
As we wrap up this episode of the BV Wrestling Beavercast, we've been talking with Dan Dresser, the first national finalist in school history from BV, coming back in 1986. And when you look back at the best memories you've got of college, and we're talking about the 4 years of the college at BV, not the 6 that may have been spent in Iowa City.
I don't think I can speak to those, Jason.
What's one thing that if you were talking to a high school kid right now and they're saying, hey, why should I go to BV? Even though you're 25, 30 years removed from campus, what was the best thing outside of the sport of wrestling that really helped you succeed at the school?
I think the people there, the campus, when I say the people there, it includes the students that were, when you're on a campus like BV, it was 1,000 students. So you're in those high schools that obviously are bigger than that. So you knew everybody. You had a close following of friends. Where Kevin and I even spoke. Where if you're at University of Iowa, a big campus, you can easily be a little bit more of a number. Obviously, you're recognizable if you're an athlete. But it was really even campus-wise, is a close-knit group, as well as you got a lot more individual attention. The campus that to think about, I was a business major, and in the middle of winter, where, believe me, Storm Lake, Iowa can be a very, very cold place. I could literally go to my business classes in shorts because they'd evolved and built a new business center that's connected to the dorm. So great environment from the facility standpoint. The people, we just had a lot of support there. So the experience was very good. And the wrestlers, the football players, the athletes themselves were very, very close and supported each other. I mean, we were all living in the same place because everybody was in the dorm. So very different experience, I think, from some of your larger institutions, and a very good experience. But they've got a great setup on campus. And I think if you're an athlete that really wants to try and go excel in both the classroom and on the mat, I think BV is a great place because they've got the facilities. And I think Coach Breeze and his staff truly are a group that can develop the athlete.
This show is part of the Mat Talk Podcast Network. For more wrestling podcasts, head over to MatTalkOnline.com.